To deliver its promised surplus, the government will have to pull off the biggest fiscal consolidation since the 1950s. And as usual, much will depend on the forecasts. Despite lacklustre growth last year, Treasury is predicting a return to trend in 2012-13 and only a slight rise in unemployment. Neil Woolrich reports.
This time last year, Wayne Swan was forecasting a budget deficit of $22 billion for 2011-12. Now that's expected to be $44 billion. Despite that blowout, the Treasurer is adamant a surplus will be delivered next financial year as promised.
We are coming back to surplus with an economy which is expected to outperform every other major developed economy.
But that pledge will depend on a set of forecasts that have been notoriously difficult to get right in recent years. The government is banking on GDP growth of 3.25% for 2012-13, almost 1 percentage point higher than the growth rate last calendar year. It's also predicting only a slight rise in the unemployment rate and a modest fall in the terms of trade, which in recent years have been near record highs.
Very conservative assumptions, and I think that adds to the credibility of the overall document. If the economic assumptions were on the high side, then we'd have some concerns about budget returning to surplus.
Tonight's budget highlights how fragile the return to surplus plan is for this government. It also highlights how fragile the state of the Australian economy is at this point.
Wayne Swan is also attempting what could be the biggest fiscal consolidation in Australia's history, turning a deficit at 3% of GDP this financial year into a modest surplus next year. But the Treasurer says the actual impact on economic growth will be less than what the headline numbers suggest.
While the size of the fiscal consolidation is significant, you cannot equate that with an impact on growth. It is not proportionate.
The government really hasn't hit people hard in any particular way. Rather, it's cancelled programs, it's revised programs, it's re-specified programs. So perhaps so they've delayed the inevitable that so they'll eventually have to come back to these measures.
Among the major cuts, spending on roads will be $4 billion lower next financial year, and agricultural spending will be cut by $500 million, mostly because of lower drought assistance.
It lacks vision for the broader Australian economy and the need to strengthen our economy. Just with a couple of notable exceptions, the federal budget does not support the economy in the way that is required.
The other potential drag on the economy is an $11.5 billion drop in GST revenue over the next 4 years. While that won't affect the federal accounts, it will give the Commonwealth less money to pass through to the states and territories. And that could force them to shrink their spending plans much more than they'd previously anticipated.
There is the risk that the state governments will also have to do a bit of belt tightening. Now, if that is the case, and it surprises the Reserve Bank the amount of fiscal tightening that's occurring across the nation, then simply it'll need to cut interest rates further.
But the markets are already pricing in another 75 basis points in rate cuts by the Reserve Bank, leaving it less room to move in 2013 if things fail to pick up. Neil Woolrich, Lateline.